It was a quiet night in New York City when Dr. Evelyn Carter locked up her small research lab and stepped outside. The streets were nearly empty, a soft drizzle making the neon lights shimmer on the wet pavement. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and checked her phone midnight. With a sigh, she started walking toward her apartment, unaware that this would be the last normal night of her life. As she turned a corner, a strange hum filled the air. The streetlights flickered, and for a brief moment, everything felt wrong. The air grew heavy, and an odd sensation crawled up her spine, like she was being watched. Then, in an instant, a brilliant white light surrounded her, and the world disappeared. When Evelyn opened her eyes, she was no longer in New York. Cold metal pressed against her back, the scent of sterilized air filling her lungs. A dull, rhythmic hum vibrated through the walls, and a faint blue glow bathed the ceiling above her. Panic surged through her as she sat up, her breath quickening. She was in a metallic room, one that clearly wasn't built by human hands. The walls were smooth and seamless, pulsing faintly with a strange energy. Her heart pounded as she realized she wasn't alone. Rows of other people lay motionless on sleek, curved platforms, their faces twisted in confusion and fear as they slowly regained consciousness. Some were in business attire, others in casual clothing, ordinary people who, like her, had been taken without warning. A metallic hiss echoed through the chamber, and a section of the wall slid open. Two towering figures stepped inside, their elongated forms draped in dark, flowing robes. Their skin was a deep shade of violet, their eyes large and black, void of emotion. Evelyn had spent years studying genetics, but nothing in her knowledge could explain these creatures. They moved with eerie precision, their long fingers hovering over control panels embedded in the walls. One of them spoke in a guttural, alien tongue, and though she couldn't understand the words, the intent was clear. They were being examined. Fear gripped her, but Evelyn forced herself to stay calm. She needed to think, to understand what was happening. Why had they taken her? Why had they taken all these people? She turned to the man lying beside her, an older gentleman in a lab coat. His eyes darted around in terror as he struggled against invisible restraints holding him in place. "Where are we?" he whispered, his voice shaking. Evelyn didn't have an answer, but before she could respond, the room shifted. The platforms began to rise, lifting them into a massive open chamber that defied all logic. The sight before her stole her breath away. She was inside a colossal starship, far beyond anything humanity had ever created. Thousands of people were contained in glass-like pods, stretching endlessly across the vast space. Some were awake, pounding against their enclosures, while others remained unconscious, their bodies suspended in eerie stillness. In the center of the chamber, a massive circular structure pulsed with an otherworldly energy. It wasn't just a ship. It was a harvesting facility. A sudden realization hit her. This wasn't a random abduction. This was a collection. And they were the specimens. A deafening alarm blared through the chamber, making Evelyn flinch. The alien figures turned sharply, their black eyes narrowing. Something had gone wrong. A flash of red light streaked across the room, and a loud explosion shook the ship. Chaos erupted. Pods shattered, and humans spilled onto the floor, their confusion turning into desperate panic. More aliens rushed in, wielding sleek weapons that crackled with energy. They fired without hesitation, beams of light striking down those who tried to escape. Evelyn ducked behind an overturned platform as a stray shot nearly hit her. Adrenaline surged through her veins. She had to get out. She scanned the room, searching for anything, any sign of weakness, any opportunity. Then she saw it. A group of figures, dressed differently from the captors, engaged in combat with the aliens. They moved with precision, their weapons humming with advanced technology. They weren't human, but they weren't part of the captors either. Whoever they were fighting against the ones who had taken her. One of the mysterious fighters, a tall figure with reptilian features and a battle-scarred suit, locked eyes with Evelyn. In a swift motion, he tossed her a small device. Instinctively, she caught it. A holographic interface flared to life, displaying symbols she couldn't read. "Run," the alien warrior said in perfect English before turning back to the fight. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Clutching the device, she bolted across the chamber, dodging debris and fallen bodies. Around her, humans fought back, some using nothing but their fists against the towering captors. Others grabbed whatever weapons they could find. A spark of defiance ignited within her. They weren't just prey. They could fight. They could survive. She reached the far end of the chamber, where a massive window revealed the cold, endless void of space. Beyond it, an entire fleet of alien ships loomed in the distance. The realization was terrifying. This wasn't just one ship. This was an operation. And humanity had no idea. Before she could process it, the ship trembled violently. More explosions rocked the walls, and alarms blared even louder. The battle was escalating, and the ship was losing stability. Then, the floor beneath her cracked, and she was falling. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the sight of Earth so far away, so small, so unaware of the war that had just begun. Evelyn Carter woke up to the sound of mechanical hissing and distant voices speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Her head throbbed, and her body ached as if she had been dragged through fire. The air was cold and sterile, filled with the faint scent of something metallic. She forced her eyes open and found herself inside a dark, massive chamber with towering walls of shimmering glass. Rows upon rows of humans were trapped inside transparent pods, their unconscious bodies floating in a strange blue liquid. Some were young, some old, but all had one thing in common: their skin was marked with thin, glowing lines, as if their blood had been tampered with. A sickening realization settled in her gut. This wasn't just an abduction. This was a harvesting facility. Panic surged through her as she tried to move, only to find heavy restraints locking her arms and legs in place. Cold metal shackles dug into her skin, and a thick collar wrapped around her neck, humming with an energy she didn't recognize. She wasn't alone. Around her, dozens of other captives were restrained the same way, their eyes wide with terror. Some were sobbing, others struggling, but none of them had any answers. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the chamber, making her freeze. The aliens were here. A group of tall, violet-skinned creatures stepped forward, their black eyes devoid of emotion. They moved with eerie precision, their robes flowing around them like liquid shadows. One of them, a being with intricate gold markings on its face, lifted a device and pressed it against the neck of a restrained man. The moment the machine activated, the man's veins glowed a deep red, and he let out a strangled scream. Evelyn watched in horror as his body convulsed, his muscles tightening as if his very essence was being drained from him. Then, just as quickly, he went limp. The alien inspected the readings on the device and nodded to its companions. The man was valuable. Evelyn's stomach twisted in fear. What was happening? Why were they doing this? She needed answers. She forced herself to stay calm, to observe, to listen. One of the captives, a frail woman with silver hair, muttered under her breath, her voice barely audible. "They're testing us," she whispered. "Sorting us like cattle." Evelyn turned her head sharply. "Why?" she asked, keeping her voice low. The woman's eyes met hers, filled with something far worse than fear knowledge. "Human blood," she said, her voice cracking. "It's the most valuable substance in the universe." The words sent a chill through Evelyn's spine. She wanted to deny it, to say it was impossible, but deep down, she knew the woman was right. The pieces started falling into place. The way humans were taken, not just randomly, but in large numbers. The strange glow in the veins of those who had been tested. The careful way the aliens handled them, not as disposable prisoners, but as something far more precious. She had spent years studying genetics, and she knew one thing for certain: humanity had always been unique, but she never imagined it was for this reason. The sound of footsteps drew closer, and Evelyn snapped her gaze forward as another alien stepped into the center of the chamber. This one was different. He wore elaborate armor, his posture radiating authority. His piercing silver eyes scanned the captives with cold calculation. "You are all here because you carry the most powerful resource in existence," he announced, his voice smooth but devoid of empathy. "Your blood contains properties no other species possesses. It heals, strengthens, even adapts. The greatest empires of the galaxy have spent centuries searching for a way to replicate it, but they have failed. He paused, tilting his head slightly, as if amused by the terror in their eyes. And so, they take it from you instead. Murmurs of fear rippled through the captives. Some shouted in protest, others begged for mercy. Evelyn clenched her fists. This wasn't just an experiment. This was an industry. A trade built on the suffering of her people. How long had this been going on? How many had been taken before them? Her mind raced through the possibilities. If human blood was this valuable, then Earth was nothing more than a resource mine to them. And the worst part? Humanity had no idea. The armored alien continued, his expression unreadable. Some of you will be selected for continuous extraction. You will live as long as your bodies allow, providing the lifeblood that fuels the galaxy's elite. Others, he gestured toward a row of silent figures standing in the shadows. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. These weren't captives. They were humans, but different. Their eyes glowed faintly, their movements too controlled, too precise. Will be enhanced, modified to serve. You will become weapons, extensions of those who rule the stars. His gaze locked onto Evelyn, as if sensing her defiance. And the rest, he continued, his voice chillingly calm, will be disposed of. A wave of raw, primal terror crashed over the captives. Cries of desperation filled the air. The silver-haired woman beside Evelyn trembled violently, whispering, "They won't let us go." They never do. Evelyn refused to accept that. There had to be a way out. She glanced around, searching for weaknesses, anything she could use to break free. And then, something caught her eye, a group of figures hidden in the upper levels of the chamber, moving with silent precision. They weren't guards. They were different. And then she saw the faint shimmer of cloaking devices flickering around their bodies. Someone else was here. Before she could react, the entire chamber shook with a deafening explosion. A blinding flash of light filled the space, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Screams erupted as captives tumbled from their broken pods, their bodies hitting the ground in a chaotic mess. The armored alien snarled in fury, barking orders in his native tongue. But it was too late. The intruders had arrived. And they weren't here to negotiate. Gunfire erupted from the shadows as the cloaked figures revealed themselves. They were a mix of different alien species, but they weren't like the captors. Their weapons tore through the guards with deadly precision, their movements swift and calculated. In the chaos, Evelyn felt her restraints loosen. A masked figure knelt beside her, his reptilian features partially visible beneath his hood. "Can you run?" he asked, his voice sharp but urgent. Evelyn hesitated for only a second before nodding. The battle was far from over, but one thing was clear: this was her only chance. As the facility burned around her, she took a deep breath and ran, not just for her life, but for the truth. The universe had been feeding on humanity for far too long. And now, it was time to fight back. The sky burned with streaks of fire as massive alien warships loomed over Earth's atmosphere, their dark hulls blocking out the sun. Explosions rippled across the planet's surface as cities fell one by one, their towering structures reduced to rubble. Humanity was at war, but it wasn't a war they had started. It was a war forced upon them, a desperate struggle for survival against an enemy they had never known existed until it was too late. Evelyn Carter stood at the heart of the resistance, her pulse racing as she surveyed the battlefield from an underground command center. Screens flickered with live footage of the chaos above, fighter jets weaving through enemy fire, soldiers holding the line against monstrous alien foot soldiers, and entire districts vanishing in blinding waves of destruction. The war wasn't just about territory. It was about survival. Just months ago, humanity had been living in blissful ignorance, unaware that their blood was the most valuable substance in the universe. The revelation had come too late. Alien forces had descended upon Earth, not to negotiate, but to harvest. Billions had been taken, their bodies drained of the life-giving essence that fueled the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Those who remained had two choices: submit or fight. and Evelyn had made her choice long ago. She turned to General Marcus Steele, a hardened soldier with scars that told a lifetime of battles. His jaw was clenched as he studied the tactical map, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. "They're pushing through the eastern defenses," he muttered, voice heavy with exhaustion. "We're losing too many people." Evelyn's mind raced, searching for a solution. The resistance had fought tirelessly, using every scrap of technology they could salvage, but they were outmatched. The enemy was stronger, faster, and more advanced. But they had one advantage: their desperation. Humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting because they had no other choice. And desperation made them dangerous. "What about the pulse weapon?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Steele's eyes flickered with hesitation. "It's untested. We don't know if it'll work." Evelyn exhaled sharply. They didn't have time for hesitation. "Then we test it now," she said firmly. Above them, the war raged on. The sky was a battlefield of fire and steel, with Earth's last remaining warships engaging the enemy in brutal dogfights. On the ground, soldiers and civilians alike took up arms, turning ruined cities into strongholds. The aliens, towering creatures with biomechanical armor, moved through the streets like reapers, harvesting those who couldn't escape. But humanity didn't go down without a fight. Snipers took positions on rooftops, launching precise attacks on enemy commanders. Bomb squads set up ambushes, turning once busy highways into death traps. Every man, woman, and child knew what was at stake. If they lost, there would be no surrender. No prisoners. Only extinction. Evelyn moved quickly through the base, her heart pounding as she reached the pulse weapon chamber. The device hummed with unstable energy, its core pulsating with a power never before unleashed. It was Earth's last hope, a weapon designed to disrupt the aliens' biological systems, severing their connection to their ships. It was risky, untested, and unpredictable, but it was all they had. She placed a hand on the activation panel and looked at Steele. "If this fails," she began, but he cut her off. "Then we die fighting." No more words were needed. The countdown began. Outside, the aliens intensified their assault, as if sensing the desperation in humanity's last stand. Evelyn could hear the screams, the gunfire, the sound of metal tearing apart as Earth's defenses crumbled. The enemy was relentless. They were almost unstoppable. Almost! As the final seconds ticked down, Evelyn closed her eyes. "For humanity," she whispered. The pulse weapon fired. A massive shockwave erupted from the underground base, spreading outward in a brilliant wave of energy. The sky lit up as enemy ships convulsed violently, their systems short-circuiting. Alien foot soldiers collapsed mid-stride, their bodies spasming as their biomechanical armor failed. The resistance fighters, watching in stunned silence, realized what had happened: the impossible. The enemy was faltering. A roar of triumph erupted through the battlefield. Soldiers pushed forward, taking advantage of the confusion. What had been a hopeless fight just moments ago had turned into a chance, one last chance to take back their planet. Evelyn stumbled back, breathless, as the screens showed enemy ships plummeting from the sky. It was working. But it wasn't over. The enemy still had their strongest forces, their most ruthless warriors. And they would retaliate. Above the ruins of Earth, the enemy's flagship remained untouched, its massive silhouette looming like a final judgment. If they were to win, they had to strike at the heart of their oppressors. Steele's voice crackled through the comms. "We take that ship, we end this." Evelyn nodded, already moving. There was no turning back now. The resistance prepared for the final assault. Evelyn felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The war wasn't won. Not yet. But for the first time, humanity wasn't just surviving. The world was not the same anymore. The sky that once held the light of hope was now darkened by the shadows of war. The alien invaders had come not to conquer, but to harvest. Humanity was nothing more than a resource to them. But they had underestimated one thing: the will of those they sought to destroy. Evelyn Carter stood on the shattered remains of what was once Earth's greatest city, her body pulsing with energy she could barely contain. The war had forced humanity to experiment with the impossible. Scientists, desperate for a way to fight back, had uncovered the secret buried within their own blood. A mutation, an evolution, a dormant power that had only awakened because of the aliens' interference. The Bloodborn were not just soldiers, they were humanity's last hope. Their bodies had adapted, their strength increased beyond natural limits, their senses sharper than any living being. But the power came with a price: pain, instability, and the terrifying knowledge that they were no longer entirely human. She turned her gaze to the horizon where the enemy's final stronghold remained, a towering fortress of obsidian metal, standing defiantly against the storm-filled sky. The remaining forces of Earth had gathered for one last assault. This was it. The moment that would decide whether humanity would rise or fall forever. Around her, the other Bloodborn stood ready, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural light that now coursed through her own veins. Among them was Daniel Graves, once a soldier, now something more. His arms were covered in faint red veins, pulsing with the energy that made them what they were. He met her gaze, nodding. "This is our last stand," he said, voice calm but firm. "We win, or we die." The air was thick with tension as the resistance forces moved into position. The enemy was waiting. They had seen what the Bloodborn could do, and they feared it. For the first time, the invaders were on the defensive. Their monstrous warriors, once invincible, had been slaughtered by beings they had created by mistake. But the final battle would not be easy. The last of the alien elite, the Highborn, still stood between humanity and victory. These creatures were different, stronger, faster, more intelligent, but so were the Bloodborn. The attack began with a single explosion that shattered the gates of the fortress. The ground trembled as the Bloodborn charged, moving faster than the eye could follow. Evelyn felt the power surge through her muscles as she leaped into the fray, her fists colliding with an armored alien twice her size. The force of the impact sent it crashing into the walls, its body breaking like glass. Around her, the others fought with the same terrifying strength, their bodies weapons forged from human pain. The aliens fought back with desperate fury, their energy weapons cutting through the air, but it wasn't enough. The Bloodborn were relentless, unstoppable, driven by the rage of an entire species that had been pushed too far. The battle raged through the corridors of the fortress, each step closer to the heart of the enemy. Evelyn felt the weight of every life lost, every sacrifice made to bring them to this moment. Her mind was sharp, focused, but deep inside, she could feel something else. The power was changing her. She could feel the hunger, the endless energy pulsing beneath her skin, whispering to her, telling her she was more than human now. But she couldn't let it consume her. She wouldn't become like the monsters they were fighting. Finally, they reached the central chamber. The Highborn stood waiting, their tall forms exuding an aura of cold dominance. They had ruled the galaxy for centuries, unchallenged, undefeated. Until now. The leader stepped forward, its silver eyes locking onto Evelyn. It studied her, as if realizing, perhaps too late, that humanity was no longer what they had once believed. "You are not human anymore," it said, its voice echoing like distant thunder. Evelyn clenched her fists, feeling the power within her coil like a storm. "No," she admitted. "We're something else now." The final fight was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Highborn were powerful, but the Bloodborn were driven by something greater: vengeance, survival, the will to reclaim what had been stolen. The battle was brutal, the fortress shaking with the force of their clash. But one by one, the Highborn fell, until only one remained. Evelyn stood before the last of them, blood staining her skin, her breath ragged but steady. The alien met her gaze, its expression unreadable. "This is only the beginning," it whispered, before she delivered the final blow. The fortress collapsed behind them as the Bloodborn emerged victorious. The war was over. Humanity had won. But as Evelyn looked at her reflection in the broken metal, she realized the truth. They had survived, but at what cost? The Bloodborn were no longer just human. They were something new, and the universe would soon learn what that meant.